Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sattology, debunking mythology. Sattology means science of truth, a study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means science or study of fake, lie, or imagination. Most of the viewers, you ask me a question about the global south, and believe me, I am not a political person, but I know things from an academic point of view. And I always tell people I see things from a Vedic perspective, every today's situations also. And that comes from a Mahabharata or Ramayana background. So that's why I don't comment on it, anything. But I do write articles sometimes, you can read it, so you'll know where I am coming from. I have a very special guest who analyzes these things. He's written more than 11 books, and he is also a very popular go-to person for all these aspects. But today we are going to talk something completely different. So without delay, let us welcome Dr. Ratan Sharda.
Sir.
Namaste. So you just came back from Egypt, and in India, the G20 foreign ministers conference wrapped up, and the finance ministers conference also wrapped up. So, like, if you know the position of India, which is now in a way negotiating at a very equal level with all the former world powers. I will say former because now the prime of US is also getting passed. That's what you're seeing. So what do you think of the conference, whether it's success or a failure? Because I don't have much information to even decide what it is.
See, I would say that gloves are off. The time of sweet talk and diplomacy, when at the end of the day, after 3 days of conferences, nothing came out, just nice sounding words, some nice sounding briefings. That's all they used to come out. This time, there has been genuine interaction, there has been frank interaction. People from different sides or on the opposite sides have spoken up, then spoken up well. I think this is the way the world has to transact business and world has to speak out. All this feeling goody goody and making nice statements, but in the back on the backside you create wars, you create unrest, and then you claim that world is not a happy place, that somebody has to become the grand cop. That days are gone. And you talk of global south. For the first time, global south has got a voice. India is leading the voice, and it has shaken up the UN, because UN, except making nice statements and spending millions of dollars, which earlier US used to finance, now they have reduced the financing. Others are trying to run it. So billions of dollars is spent on a talking shop when nothing comes off. Security Council nobody listens to. UN nobody listens to. Mr. Modi has been saying time and again that it's time UN is reorganized and reorganized and reshaped. Unfortunately, there is no will with anybody, because many countries are happy with the conflicts because that serves their purpose and their defense armament industry very well. That being so, if south of the big south, which has got natural resources now, which has got market on their side, and also minerals and various kind of natural resources, if they say that enough is enough and we won't be exploited anymore, and the so-called prosperous nations who actually are sitting on the piles of exploited resources from these poor countries, who are impoverished by these very people, then they have to be answerable. So that is the importance of global south. That is the message to UN. Whether UN listens or not is a different issue. Similarly, G20, which is an expanded version of elite G7 club, there also, unless people agree that there are issues which need to be resolved very frankly, discussed frankly, you will have only talking shops which serve no purpose. And on that point, I would say that this particular G20 summit of foreign ministers was very different from what it used to be so far in other parts of the world. If you listen to the speech that Mr. Modi gave during that time, it is very frank and very blunt. And that is a message that has to go out. And India now is speaking very clearly in clear voice, the way it has stood very gallantly between the pressures from the Russian and American side, and used it to benefit for the country and for other poor countries. I think that's a message that has gone down well, that the countries which are coming up will not be any more suppressed either in political field or economic field. I think that's a good message.
The African Union leaders, like particularly Namibia and Ethiopia and other countries, they are very much vocal now. In fact, one of the meetings I was
Yeah.
seeing, that the French President Macron was asked to keep quiet and like publicly disagreed with them, because what happened was he was trying to talk about the economic contribution of France, and he was bluntly told, no, France is still a colonial power, and they don't
Yeah.
let African countries function. And we have also seen Ethiopian leader coming out very openly, mocking at the German ministers that you need to get out. You know, the same rules which apply for us in your country apply for you in this country also. So the but if you look at the Egypt has been a very strong Western post. Maybe the fear of coup or something, or it's just a fragile government in the one city literally, not the spread over the entire country. So, what do you think of? Looks like a completely puppet for me. So, what do you think
See,
about the global South and Africa?
my last visit before COVID was to Southeast Asia and another ancient land where you had Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand, etc. And now this time after COVID, I've gone to Egypt. What is common between them is Southeast Asia is much better off, I would say, as compared to Egypt and Middle East countries. Despite not having very good resources, they were also exploited in by colonial powers, and they are also poor. But I found a little better society as compared to Egypt. Egypt, the life throbs in Cairo, but outside Cairo, you can see a little life in, let us say, Luxor. But apart from that, it's all not just desert, it's very rundown, very depressing scenario. Even if you go to ancient, a very popular city like Alexandria, it's a rundown, totally depressing scenario. And people are really poor. In fact, when you buy your handicrafts, you feel so sorry that you're paying such a price, that how would they survive because they have done a good job. That is part one. Part two is that their history is so glorious. In fact, in many parts, I would say it is even more, it is older and much more glorious even compared to the Southeast Asia that I saw, which is comparatively newer as compared to what Egypt civilization was. It's a grand civilization. And you will know that when actually that grandness was there, it was a natural habitat. Climate change had not destroyed it. But once the attacking hordes came, invaders came first, the Romans, and then you have this Islamic hordes. What happens when these hordes come? When they destroy the local civilization and they destroy the local culture, what is left? Show me one country which has remained well-to-do or a little better off uh, when it is left by the colonial powers or by the Islamic hordes. They're in the worst condition. So whether it's Iraq, old Iraq, whether it's old Jordan, whether it's Egypt, or for that matter, even Turkey or the Iranian countries. Now these nations used to be prosperous, used to be doing very well, but once these uncivilized hordes came and only they wanted was money, they wanted exploitation, and they wanted to destroy the local culture. They could not supplant with any culture which was positive, which was effective, and which was good. So you see that ultimately all of them wallow in poverty, and the reason why some Middle East countries are doing better is only because of fuel. If that fuel had not come, the natural resources given by nature or God Almighty, they wouldn't have anything to live on. In fact, they were living a worse kind of scenario life just about till 19th century or 20th century. In fact, so if they had not oil, did they have anything else? Nothing. And they did not. The people who came, who invaded, who destroyed the local culture, left nothing. And even if you see this, even today, Egypt people are different from the Middle East Arabs. They are still much better off. They're in the sense of their cultural behavior with outsiders. Like when we went, very warm reception. I mean, except the poverty, you found them very friendly and they found them very nice people. I didn't find much of a extremist, behavior which Muslim Brotherhood wants to put there. Not yet, at least. So my lesson was when a country is invaded, whether it's invaded by colonialists, whether it's invaded by Islamist hordes, they leave nothing behind except destruction, except exploitation, and impoverishing the people. The very reason you have struggle in continuous civil wars, even in Africa or Middle East, is because the colonials, whether they were Dutch or whether they're French or whether they were Caucasians, they have created such fault lines That same tribe, same nation have been divided by straight lines into different sections. Then there is no thought about it. They have tried to smother the local civilization, the local culture, and local tribes. And you see continuous hardship, continuous war, continuous battles, and that is being fueled again by the same colonial powers. They still exploit them. They still take away natural resources. So this is the crux that all the global south and all the countries which are exploited, they have to rise like India. They have to go back to the roots. They have to go back to the strengths. Only then they can rise. They cannot rise looking at these people who exploited them and destroyed the civilizations. So unless they go to the roots, go to the very nature, the what kept them at peace and happy, they will feel misery. What we see today, whether it's Egypt or whether you see Cambodia.
I think that's exactly the reason why more countries are accepting India's leadership, because India has a track record of balanced economic contribution, like in all the countries where its companies have invested.
See,
Uh,
Aditya ji, India never allowed its spirit, its natural spirit of life to die down. 1,000 years of continuous atrocities, slavery, exploitation, but somewhere somebody would always keep on standing up. So in those 1,000 years, you had continuous rebellions, you had continuous revolutions, you had continuous resistance to kill their spirit, kill their intellect, and somehow, despite all the destruction, it survived, and that is the reason it's still alive. It is not alive because British gifted them a union state, or as Rahul Gandhi says, union of states. It survived because culturally it was one geography, one nation, and it did not allow its roots to dry down. Great people throughout the ages always stood up, kept on nurturing that cultural strength of India, and that is why India survived and thrived. I hope the other countries learn that lesson, whether they have resources more or less than India, whether the population is much lower than India. For India to survive and thrive with 140 billion people, that is a lesson. That if you are true, as Dindal Upadhyay used to say, to your spirit or your your own nature, inherent nature, you cannot progress. So each country has its own nature, and that is what the strength of every country is. Unless they recognize that Chiti, as Dindal Upadhyay put it, they will keep on facing these problems, whether it's Egypt, whether it's Iran, whether it's whether it's any African country. They have to look for their own spirit, their own chiti, their own inherent strength and their nature. They cannot copy somebody else. Like Aurobindo said, that every nation has got a different problem to solve. They have got a different question. You cannot copy from anywhere. So unless we stop copying from West, and unless we create our own structures, our own thinking, and our own models, other countries will suffer. And that is a lesson India is trying to give to other countries.
The connections of Egyptians' ancient civilization, I'm not talking about the current one, is very starkingly similar to India. Very starkingly. Like, in fact,
Yes.
most of their local cultures and customs and spices, food cooking habits are
Yeah.
directly derived from the west coast of India, Goa or other places. We can see the kind of spices also they use. There are a lot more cultural similarities there, not the religious similarities, because the religion is
In fact,
different.
you if you've gone to Egypt, you'll remember that the obelisk itself came from the meditation of the queen. And that meditation resulted in obelisk, which is quite close to what Shivaling is. So it's a tower of strength, a star of energy, and it has traveled all over the Western Hemisphere. So this strength of culture, which is very close. See, as you meditate, it is always possible that you, as you spiritually rise, the thinking, whether it's African or whether it's Egyptian or India, they will come to the same focus stand, come to the same strength of your Atma, of your spirituality, and like looking at life beyond only material gains. That is any civilization which has gone through this process of spiritual rejuvenation. I found that in Egypt also.
So the obelix, the kind of feature, the poles, which is made in all the kingdoms of India, is generally called Indradhwaj. Generally, in Mahabharata
Yeah.
and Ramayana, Indradhwaj means it's a flagpole of Indra. But later on, it has different people have given different meanings. But that is a constant feature across the world, whether you go to South America or Africa or India. But the origin is said to be India,
Even
Ayodhya.
in their case, see, their spiritual heads, their priests were very important.
Very
Like
important.
we had our mantris, we had our spiritual heads, our rishis and munis who actually directed the kings. I found that in Egypt also.
the whole
So
concept.
intellectual leadership is the strength.
I mean, the old wisdom sometimes gets comes up, but it also gets subdued in the new systems nowadays also, which has happened in most of the countries. One exciting thing which you told me before was Alexandria. Now, Alexandria port was conquered by the Romans, conquered by the Greeks, actually established by the Greeks first.
Right.
Then Romans and Greeks had established over a previous port, which was already existing. And some people say, and I'm not saying that, some people say, in fact, University of Cairo, one of the universities which I really love, they have preserved history as it is. I don't know how they did it, but they did it. And they mention that the some of the Macedonian kings, we all know Chandragupta Maurya had conquered Macedonia. It was under him, Hellenic rule. And is part of that culture. There were a lot of elephants were there. Did you find elephants in Alexandria? Elephant statues?
No, I think most of those things have been destroyed. I didn't find any elephant statue. There were some, in fact, even in Egyptian places, I hardly found elephants. I found many other animals, and all the animals were loved. They were also mummified. I didn't find many signs of elephants. At least I couldn't see them. Alexandria hardly has left any of the old sites, except one Roman temple, which only the obelisk stands, or the in fact a column stands, and the catacombs which are there. Apart from that, hardly any sign. People have tried to find out where Alexander died or whether he was buried there. There is no sign available. It's a decaying city, nothing much to talk about, honestly. It was a big letdown. It's very poor, very poor. Even
Alexandria
in
was
Cairo, if you go on the outskirts, there are 6, 7 floors of buildings without plasters, without any facility, and just on the lanes of just 8 to 10 feet wide lanes. As you cross the flyover, they go down and you can see, look at them. And well, most of the countries have such slums. I'm not saying that other countries don't have, we also have. But the sheer density of population in those areas and the kind of life they live is quite disappointing, because because we generally look at Egypt only through Cairo, and Cairo is very brilliant, very well lit, and very looks very prosperous, very nicely laid out. But life outside that may be true of any desert place. But Alexandria had hoped to be in a much better shape. It was not. Another interesting thing, as you find, is that the obsession with life and death, that is, whether Egyptians or Indians or any old civilization, you look at African civilizations. But in this case, very similar to what we thought of. Only thing I found, that while their search for meaning of life at the death ended with the material gains to be put with king's side. So you had slaves to be slaves who would die with the king or killed with the king, and he would also be mummified and go in the same place where king was laid down or mummified, or even the pet animals, all the kind of things that they required, whether it's golden throne or any other, a lot of materialism was there. While in case of Indian civilization, when they talked of death, they talked of afterlife, which was not just fulfilling the material needs, but also punarjanma, the principle of karma, that depending on what you do, you will end up in a new life cycle with maybe higher or lower in the biological order. While in case of Egypt, I found it stopped at death and celebrating the death. Kings themselves celebrated the death by creating their own, their own graves, their own tunnels, their own pyramids. But beyond that, the thing did not go beyond that moment of death, and they thought they will afterlife enjoying the same material benefits. That is where India was a step ahead. They were contemporary, I would say, in the terms of life cycle of the civilization. But Indian thought went beyond that. The issue of karma, the principle of karma, and you totally you burn down your the body of the dead. It goes 5 elements, go back to nature. There is nothing left, and the Atman goes for the next cycle of life. That is the difference, which I found very rarely, whether in pagans of Europe or sometimes when I hear the stories of African gurus, they have such that kind of rebirth idea. But I found them missing in Egypt, though. To that level, they had a lot of thinking, a lot of meditation.
actually their academic professors have done a very good work, and I don't want to take any name there because I know them very well, but I won't take the name without their permission, because they are very much, in a way, averse to any American propaganda. So they have done a good work in rewriting the history books. and they're trying to remove all European references to Egypt. And they're trying to, I think, academic world is trying hard to connect it back to the spirit of Africa. I mean, that's where their projects are. And the spirit of Africa, if you look at it, the richest countries in Africa today are Nigeria, and after that is South Africa. I mean, not South Africa is no longer the number one. Nigeria is number one. But Egypt is somewhere clawing back. I mean, they're competing with Kenya, competing with, I mean, very few countries are there, Algeria and other places, but they're trying to claw back. So one question comes into the mind is, can the Indian researchers establish, because if you look at the original African culture, where the afterlife, and according to Egyptian professors, afterlife means, so like you correctly said, that they were the spiritual masters of their country as well as kings. And the respect was given so that they can live comfortably in the next life. So automatically they're recognizing next life. So, but the still it's not as developed as the source of all the culture of the world, which is Bharat. But still, my question to you is, can the Indian researchers tie up and start giving them food to start looking at their history in a different way? Because right now they are looking from a European lens, their own history.
As you rightly pointed out, it is not just economic cooperation that is needed by global South. It is also intellectual cooperation that is required, because today most of the countries are still influenced by Western ideas, Western thoughts, Western philosophy, and they look at their own civilization from Western glasses. Till that goes, they will not be able to reach back. And on that, I found that Egypt has still stuck with, stuck to their roots, and people talk very glowingly about their own ancient civilization. One more thing that struck me, like if you go to Mexico, that Western world wants the ancient civilization to go to museum. They don't want them to be alive. So they succeeded to do it in Egypt. They killed entire history in between, and most of the countries have seen to it that the people end up at exotic museums. Then they can be glorified. But any living civilization is not glorified. Check out any country in the world which is glorified by Western civilization or Western historians or philosophers. Very few, and those who do are very few philosophers who I would say actually get converted to ancient civilizations, whether they go to India or to Indonesia or whichever place. But the basic idea that when you want to look at the Western perspective of your own country, you will not be able to reach to find your true strength. And that is where India and any country which has strong cultural base should be cooperating with each other, sharing with each other. I have talked about ICCS many times, International Center for Cultural Studies, who has brought together many ancient civilizations on its platform. They exchange thoughts, they exchange papers, and that is how slowly the people are reviving their ancient ideas, ancient philosophies. They may not be as elaborate as Hindu philosophies, but they have their own place. They could not rise from that because they were colonized. Whatever was there was also destroyed, but some elements stay, and those elements need to come back, come together, and find that glory in them. You know that many people in Europe and many people in Mexico are going back to their native religion, a so-called pagan religion. So, in fact, we should respect what today, because most of these cultures respected nature, lived with nature. That is a basic lesson. So these people are going back to their roots, whether Hindus or other civilizations, is their strength. They cannot copy the West, because West has only told us how to exploit. The Muslim civilization has taught us how to exploit nature, how to exploit any material to their satisfaction without worrying about nature, without worrying about replenishment, without worrying about recycling. So this thought of ancient civilizations will ultimately result in rebirth of this planet possibly, because what we are doing today or what we have done so far, all these talks of G20, all these talks of talking shops, Davos, where nothing happens except talks for years together. They're saying how to save planet Earth, but they go sit in AC, they sit in AC in snowbound places. I would say they should go to Egypt, sit on open beaches without wasting money on air conditions and creating all kind of environment disaster in those areas. They will then understand how you can live close to nature without actually destroying the nature. And that is a lesson I think ancient civilizations can give to the world, which is still struggling for answers.
See, the most rarest of Egyptian artifacts from the past are stored in Vatican Museum, actually. Vatican Museum has all their references. And the it's irony that they celebrate Egyptian history in Vatican to show that how primitive they were. I mean, that's the whole purpose of Vatican is generally. Now, the
But were they? That is the question. Were they? When the Vatican and those areas struggling with hunting down deers and bears, boars and killing them and eating raw fresh, living in caves. At that time, Egypt was already at the peak of its civilization, just like India.
I
So
mean,
how are they backward? Look at their art. Look at their craft. Look at their engineering. The humongous pyramids, the humongous temples that are made. It is not done without maths, without science. It cannot be done. So they had this art of mining metals, creating superior structures which have lived through 4,000 years. What has Vatican and whatever these civilizations born just 2,000 years back to offer? So what is backward? When you say that somebody came down from heaven and said, "I will take over your sins, and now you can be liberated." What happened to people before that particular person? What kind of religion is that which says that only my religions do, everything else is wrong? So the very idea of claiming to be superior to everybody else is total anathema to world civilization. And that is the very idea that you are good in museum but not in real life is what Western world wants. That is what they've done to Red Indians also. They've done to Latin Americans also. So you finish their civilizations, whether it's Africa or Latin America or America itself, put them in museum and celebrate them. So this is the irony.
they're advanced in stealing things, very advanced. So that's what they do all the way. They go everywhere and steal things. So one of the things which also come about Egypt is like other than pyramids, we already know the engineering of the pyramids, which is they say that aliens built it, and Egyptians don't respect think that aliens built it because if you go to South Egypt, people are very tall even today, very tall. If you go to Somalia and some parts of Sudan, it's very common to find a 7 feet man even today. And that again ties back to the Mahabharata Ramayana evidence. Even Hanumanji says people decrease in size. So it again ties back over there with our scriptures. So very accurate. Now coming to the Suez Canal. Suez Canal is ever since Egypt nationalized it, it has become a global source for control. Global point of control. Now India is has taken up a part of land near Suez Canal. Now, how is India viewed in Egypt according to your experience from the political and growing side of it? An Egyptian president was
Importance
a
given
chief
to
guest
Egyptian
also.
Prime Minister, the Egyptian head of the state who came to India on Republic Day. And if you remember, this goes back to Nehru's time. Mr. Nasser, Nehru, and Tito, the triumvirate who created non-aligned movement. So Egypt and India have been close for a very, very long time. Somehow the political changes happened, somehow the military changes happened, but the civilizational closeness and also this closeness due to non-alignment right from 1950 onwards has been there. But our governments were weak. They were not visionary earlier. They were doing their job. It's not they were not doing their job. At the same time, they didn't have global vision. They didn't have a grand vision for India. When you have a grand vision for India, then you start looking at your global role. Then you start looking at the strengths. And built on strength, you try to build alignments and you try to build alliances. That's what this government is doing. I think there is huge scope between Egypt and India to work together without upsetting any other country, without destroying any other alliances with anybody, because they have similarities and they can understand each other. The kind of, as I said, warm reception we got as Indians, though not many Indians visit Egypt as compared to Europe, other places, was very nice. And they know my experience similar in Jordan also. So when you go to old civilization, whether Iran, whether it's Jordan or it's Egypt, Indians are welcome because that is the very nature of those ancient civilizations. So that inherent warmth can be exploited very well. Now India is trying to build its own, necklace of strength vis-a-vis the necklace of pearls that China is trying to build up, and is befriending all the countries, across Indian Ocean and other oceans. I think that is a good strategy, and both can benefit from it because Egypt needs very strongly the strength of farming, agriculture, industrialization. Because in Egypt, I came to know industrialization has actually gone down compared to what it was earlier. So that has to come up. For that, they need to have models like India, which can be small scale, which can be decentralized economy, which can be production oriented, and they can have better trade and they can have better interaction. I think that is how these countries can come together and boost their economies, because they are the biggest markets, they are the biggest natural resource holders, and that is the strength.
One question comes about the Egypt is like the concept of their gods, which is European version of it, which is not correct. And another thing is connecting Egypt to the rest of the African Union, which the African Union is trying hard. Egypt is kind of a rebel for African unions, entire African Union. African Union has worked tremendously well to ward off all kinds of colonial references now, and they are united in many ways, and they are also talking about it in openly also to again European leaders. But what they really lack is the strength of some other power. China has been stepping in. China has really, I would say, if I look at the good side of China, not the bad side where the debt trap is the bad side. Good side of the China is that the China has not interfered in their local cultures. It has not said that you need to change your local customs, local cultures, and I will define your history. China has not done that. In and the debt trap is the negative side of it. I will not touch upon it right now. India has been regarded as a good side about the history, about Mahatma Gandhi's, Mahatma Gandhi's travels across Africa, maybe political. Now we all know the reality of how Mahatma Gandhi worked, but generally still taken positively. So, what steps can India take to help African Union revive its decolonized history as well as decolonized politics? Because most of the governments are toppled without even being noticed by the world media, by the Europeans and Americans.
I think the summit that India has been doing with African countries and the focus it has with number of countries attending summit in India of all the African countries are very high numbers. So that will slowly build bridges. In terms of financial muscle, India doesn't have the financial muscle yet as compared to China. Its goodwill, as I talked earlier also, that local cultures felt that India being a large ship, it will not gobble up the smaller ships and they can sail behind Indian larger ship. That is the strength, cultural strength. But in terms of financial muscle, India has not flexed the muscles yet, nor it has that kind of resources like China, a very focused government, which is trying to corner natural resources as a trader, as a partner, not really yet as a colonial power. But as you rightly pointed out, the debt trap is where the people are afraid slowly that it's posing. Once the debt trap idea is known to people and they have suffered, they will have to look at India like Sri Lanka had finally to come back to India. Despite all the talk of saying that we are able to exploit China, we are able to exploit India in a business sense in terms of getting their projects and their money, but they realize they fell into a trap which they are finding very difficult to break. So once this realization comes, like Myanmar has got the realization in many places, I think then the chance for India to bring up a close cooperation will be much higher, and that is happening right now, I think. And also a lot of cooperation is happening, but as I said, the size of cooperation is not as large as what China has already put in. So it will not be easy, but yes, as I said, culturally they realize that the dominating nature of China is the real danger for those countries, and there is a real alarm that China rings today in terms of other countries. You look at the favorable reaction to China, you'll find the most unfavorable country if you go to pure research. So that is the negative. And if you find India maybe neutral in terms of what countries feel about, generally the feeling is very positive, and India has to build on that.
See, most of the American researches or European researches, I don't rely on them now because most of the data is exactly opposite of that. So if pure research says something, then you have to take it with a grain of salt, analyze it deeply, and debunk it
Yeah, even if
properly.
you take, but even if you talk to people, whether it's pure research or otherwise, you will realize that China's bullying has cut people across the world, and that people are slowly realizing. This entire road belt initiative has gone into cold storage, and poorer countries are suffering heavily because of its debt trap, and the way it has behaved with all the neighbors, that is also in the open. So whether you go by pure research or whether you go by the real scenario in the world, you find entire Southeast Asia actually feeling very oppressed by the Chinese muscle power, and that is what is going to make it unfavorable with other countries also.
I mean, Chinese Communist Party must hear that, because Chinese Communist Party doesn't represent China in many ways, because Chinese people are different than Chinese Communist Party members. So one of the questions, last question it is that the in the if you look at the surrounding cultural side of Africa, North Africa, towards the African Egyptian West, now we see Libya completely destroyed by the Western forces, and after that desert, and then Algeria, a pocket, which is a French, even though French dominated colony. And so all these things, countries are there. So how does this kind of dynamics, which is completely dominated by the West and Egypt? I mean, Egypt is completely landlocked. On the east side, they have Israel, which is a pro-Western alliance, and on the east side is also pro-Western alliance. Only in the south you'll see a neutral countries now starting. Rest of the Africa until South Africa, and South Africa is also nowadays trying to be independent of the West. So in this context, if you look at it, the global South becomes even more important to preserve the cultural identity, preserve the financial freedom, present the prevent to preserve the political freedom as well. So, what steps, which I'm not saying the government, I'm saying the common Indians or businessmen can take to help in this kind of revival in Africa? Because there's a lot of money to be made there, a lot of cobalt mines are there.
Yeah, I wonder how long West can control African countries and the Middle East. Its game is up. The Korean Russian War has clearly shown that West has nothing but exploitation in mind, has nothing but keeping the conflicts alive in its mind. So as the countries who are now under conflict with each other, till they realize that West is not a friend of theirs, it is only there to exploit their geographical situation, their natural resources, and also keep the conflict on. They will not be able to come out of this. It is going to be a slow grind, but they will realize, because the situation right now, we have seen what is happening in Syria now. We see how various countries are realizing how they've been exploited and oppressed, and also the way Ukraine war has gone about it. I've shared a video today from US. If you see, a young man actually shouting down the government official about USA's alleged bombing of the Russian German fuel pipeline. If that is the kind of rebellion that is also happening in America, that is the way US is also being exposed by their own people and the countries who are actually suffering. You will see that slowly the magic of Western hold. US can no more spend money on these countries. Earlier it had a lot of money. Now it has only paper currency, not really strong economy. So with a weak economy, despite being a very huge economy, like in India, we say even a dead elephant has a huge value. So America, even as its economy is slowing down and maybe also dying, it still has a lot of value, no doubt. But having no money now to spare for such countries and except selling armaments, ultimately will dawn on the people. I think when that wisdom dawns on, we have the world has fought all through these ages for one reason or the other. I don't think we are talking of having a Buddha there where the world will become a peaceful place. But these continuous conflicts will have to see that these are all being created by the Western world, specifically, at least nowadays, US. As we see, when there was no need for NATO, it has been expanded. The way it has created a huge misery around Europe also now. When Europe rebels, then slowly other people will start rebelling, and Europe is seething under anger right now.
You know, the African countries will unite more to pre-Buddha period than Buddha period, because Buddha period is it doesn't work with them. But our deities, Agni Dev, Surya Dev, this will connect with them more,
Yes.
because that's their original culture. Surya Dev, Tanzania is one of the best countries I've visited, and I simply love that country. And anyone from Tanzania watching, you need to know that. And I feel at home over there. It's like a beautiful country. And thank you so much, Ratan Sharda ji, and for all
Wonderful
the
talking to
viewers
you.
watching.
So
Do
thank you so
like, share,
much.
and subscribe.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Namaste.
Bye.